So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another battle actually from the ongoing RP series which is on the Discord. This one is going to be between Unbar and the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, and obviously geographically, as I've said before about the RP, they don't start off in their sort of allotted place. Like, it's not lore friendly where they start. Like, I think the commanders of each faction got to pick where on the sort of predetermined map they would start, and in this case Unbar and the Misty Mountains will be fighting it out. Although this is the mountain pass, and obviously this is quite reminiscent of where the Orcs of the Misty Mountains are from in a lore-friendly sense, even if I don't think on the map that is where the battle is taking place. And actually I've got two battles which are on this one, and I have actually recorded the other one first, but I think we will be seeing this one before that, purely because I like to do the BFA battles as soon as possible, because obviously, you know, it's more relevant closer to the time the RP is an ongoing and evolving thing, and while I'm not covering every single battle that's on it, even so, it's still good to sort of get a bit of an order to things. We'll go through the army competitions, and I will go through these a little bit more quickly than I usually do, purely because obviously it's 5 Unbar armies and 3 Misty Mountains armies. And just as a side note before we start, obviously, when it's a 5v3, I always tend to back the 5, usually because the numbers really do make a big difference, and particularly in this case where Unbar will be able to back that up with a decent amount of quality, you would have thought. And even if the Misty Mountains have brought really, really strong armies to this sort of fight, you would still back the numbers in this situation. But with the Mountain Pass, there are a number of areas where you can sort of really hold up and try and hold your ground. So we'll see if the Misty Mountains are able to do that as the fight goes along. Starting off with Sin of the Dark Cloud, I believe I actually got sent this battle by 2 different people, but we'll show it from Sin's point of view, seeing as he is one of the developers. Playing as one of the Unbar armies, the one that's furthest at the back here, his deployment zone made him sort of outside the mountain pass, so to speak, and he has got some Corsair archers. So again, I would imagine the Unbar armies are a little bit lower in terms of quality, but the sheer numbers should serve them pretty well, especially seeing as the Misty Mountains will have quite a lot of goblins. Got some Castamir's Rangers in the mix there, as well as a catapult. That catapult is going to take a long time to get into position. You can see the Misty Mountains have entrenched themselves in the highest point of the map, which is understandable in a 5v3. A mix of Corsair Pikemen, Castamir's Legion, and there are some Abrazanim in there as well, I believe. They look like Abrazanim Nadu Tariq, oh actually no, they're Nadu Bawib. That's really difficult to see, or it might just be an officer. Yeah, it is actually just an officer. My bad. So we've got some Crossbow Corsairs as well, so obviously Crossbow Corsairs very damaging, but also very fragile to ranged fire. Some Corsair Blackguards, the Javelin should be very useful, and they're dual wielders in melee, so decent skills to them there. And Beleaguered Footmen, there's also some Naru Na'ari Royal Guard in there, but really the Castamir's Legion unit here are going to be the primary thing that this army is going to have over the Misty Mountains, you would imagine. And other than that, the Crossbow Corsairs and the Blackguards are the 2 things that Unbar have invested in there. And then we have this army over here, the second of the Unbar armies, which is going to be played by Cannon Fodder actually. So we'll go through his army from the front, seeing as I imagine he's got his garbage at the front. Although Beleaguerd Footmen aren't really garbage, you know, they do have, they're not great at killing infantry, obviously Spear Malice, the fact that they have relatively low base attack values. But even so, they're pretty solid. You know, they won't go down too easily, and that's really all you can ask from a basic spear unit, at least until 0.97 drops, where spearmen work a little bit differently. We've got some Beleaguer Halberds as well, so a bit of AP, which will be useful against quite a lot of the Misty Mountains forces. Some Corsair Archers as well, so going for cheaper archers, but against the Misty Mountains, that's not going to be too much of a problem. Cheap archers in general in the current patch, obviously, pretty good regardless. More armor piercing in the shape of the Abrazanim Nadu Tariq. They do not have the armor upgrade, that doesn't really matter, you would suggest. With their maces, the damage that they can deal and sort of sit right in the middle of the line, adding a little bit more AP to help deal with the numerous goblins they will surely be facing. Some Corsair Blackguards as well, 2 units of those, so more javelins. At the back we've got more Beleaguer Footmen and Halberds, so more of a Beleaguer look to this army as opposed to the split between Corsairs and Castamir's Legion that Sin had, although we do have another unit of Naru Na'ari Royal Guard, this is obviously the General's Bodyguard. Some Abrazanim Narduzagar as well, so more skill here, more so than AP. Could be very useful. The sort of basic heavy goblin units are really going to struggle to do much damage at all against a skillful unit like the Narduzagar. But obviously at range, you know, the goblins do have some options to deal with them, and obviously the uber tier units like the Blackback Berserkers will tear their way through that. Some Warlords of Unbar, which some cavalry is always nice. He might struggle to use it on this map, however, purely from how the goblins appear to have set up on the map, so it might be difficult to get good charges off, we'll see. And then some Castamir's Rangers and some Crossbow Corsairs hidden in this wooded area over here. Now we have some deployed units up here from Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Lab, presumably hoping to catch out the Misty Mountains if they did spread themselves all across this higher plateau on the mountain pass, but that isn't the case. But this is good because obviously these units will not be marooned either and surrounded and killed, as we've seen before on this map. You know, aggressive deployments up in this area where the deployment zones allow the team on the bottom half of the map to deploy up here. Oftentimes the other team will then simply come over and overwhelm the small forces up here, although this is a pretty decent one. Castamir's Rangers, Corsair Pikemen, Beleaguered Halberds are in there. We've got some Harbingers and some Castamir's Legion, obviously a big blob. Difficult to see everything, some Crossbow Corsairs as well, some Blackguards, so pretty comprehensive force up here from Eclipse, but no immediate danger. They'll just have to march into position just like everyone else, it would seem. Over here we have more of Eclipse's army, so he has deployed pretty far forwards, although there's Engsvits as well. Corsair Savages, obviously more AP. They have literally 0 armour, I believe, which does mean that under ranged fire they will melt. But in melee, you know, decent attack values, good AP. You know, they definitely have their niche. Some Corsair Pikemen as well, and then some Beleaguered Halberds. Meanwhile, we have Engsvits, who also has deployed pretty far forwards in a big blob. Beleaguered Archers, Castamir's Legion, Corsair Pikes, more Castamir's Legion over there. Some more Narun Aru Royal Guard, again the General's Bodyguard unit. And that's pretty much it. I mean, again, it's quite difficult to differentiate when they're deployed like this. Some Castamir's Rangers, but fairly standard fare once again. And then the final army, who was, it looked like he was getting ready for a sort of 1v1 down here in the valley, but as we can see, the third Misty Mountains player is deployed behind the mountain range. So Starling is probably, he can either go through the little gap, which I believe you can march through there. I've never seen a player take advantage of that, but I'm sure you can. And, well, either that, or he's going to have to join his allies and march up through the plateau up there. So he's got some Corsair Blackguards as well as some Crossbow Corsairs, so some really potent AP missiles here from Unbar. If they get into range on the Misty Mountains, it's going to be a bad day for the Goblins. And then some Castamir's Legion, Corsair Pikemen, Abrazanim Nadu Tariq as well. He's got some Narun Aru Sentinels combined with some Harbingers. So a pretty potent infantry force there, as well as some Abrazanim. Then over here we have a couple more units of Castamir's Legion, as well as a cavalry force of Númenórean Lancers. Again, unlikely that they will be super useful, even less so than the Warlords really, because the Warlords at least have got that multiple HP to them, very tanky. The Númenórean Lancers on the other hand will probably struggle in this environment to get good charges off, but still, if they can sort of push their way through the lines, that could still be a problem for the Goblins. That's actually a pretty decent force from Unbar as well, lots of Castamir's Legion units. It's not a low quality force for the team of 5 here. We'll see if the Misty Mountains can do anything about that. The Misty Mountains have deployed over here as well, and this is the part of the map we hardly ever see back here. And Vaughn Mountain is playing as the first of the Misty Mountains armies we will look at. He's got a ballista, which I believe the only artillery piece that they could snipe out is Sin, and Vaughn and Sin are the two armies which are furthest apart from one another in the corners of the map. The entire mountain range is between them, but even so, it will still give them a decent edge in the range fight. We shall see how that goes. Heavy Goblin Crossmen have got, obviously this is going to be a very important unit for the Misty Mountains in this environment, you would suspect, you know, just helping to deal with the units like the Castamir's Legion and the Abrazanim on the front lines. Otherwise the Goblins are probably going to be a bit of trouble if it comes down to a sheer attrition fight between both the lines. Seeing as the quality you would imagine is probably going to be with Unbar here. Heavy Goblin Archers as well, obviously the Heavy Goblin Archers are just in practice, they're actually worse than the standard Goblin Archers at the moment, purely because there are more of the standard Goblin Archers and they're cheaper. But the Heavy Goblin Archers still, you know, will basically do the same job as any other standard Orc Archer, and we do have some standard Goblin Archers here as well, so really big Goblin firing squad here. Then back here we have some Blackback Mountain Berserkers, which is going to be Vaughn Mountain's General. Very, very dangerous actually. In fact, none of Unbar's infantry units will want to go one-to-one with the Blackbacks. But I think in the numbers that Unbar have got their elites, they shouldn't be worried too much about the Blackback Berserkers. White Uruk Fearmongers, obviously very good pole arm unit with that AP. The Ghetto Fountain Guard. And then we have the Black Uruks, the Mountains, which again are pretty much the exception in the Misty Mountains roster. You know, most of the Misty Mountains you expect them to either be sort of super high tier like the Goblin King Bodyguard or the Blackback Berserkers, or sort of crap like most of the Heavy Goblin units. But the Black Uruks bring a bit of skill to the table. They are a two-handed sword unit, and it can be an important part of the Misty Mountains roster. They can really help tie your infantry line together, and there are 203 of them per unit, which on huge is, you know, no small thing. And then back here we've obviously got the Heavy Goblin Spears as well, 253 of these, pretty much the the heart and soul of the Misty Mountains roster, at least in the current patch. I think they are being sort of brought into line more with the rest of the heavy goblins in the next patch, because at the moment it's just kind of an all-round unit which is too good at basically everything that you have to bring it. It's similar in many ways to the 4th Legion Shield Guard, or maybe not quite as extreme as that, but the AP certainly helps them. And the fact of the matter is they are stronger as a sort of infantry unit than the basic heavy goblins. Like, you never see the heavy goblin halberdiers anymore because there's no reason to bring them over the heavy goblin spears. We'll see how that changes in the coming patch, but for now it's probably a good thing that these guys are so strong, because they're going to need it against this very extensive Unbar force they're faced with, and the cave troll drummers, just to keep everyone pointing in the right direction. And then we shall have a look back here at the Misty Mountains stronghold here at the peak of the mountain. We have, who is this? Valda, who is going to be playing as the other Misty Mountains army, so he's got some heavy goblin crossbowmen, snow trolls as well as cave trolls. So obviously here are the trolls. We've got some Goblin King bodyguard as well, which I imagine is probably his general's bodyguard. Can we see Azog? Yes, we can. So this is obviously a bit of a blob, which will take some time to sort of organise itself. White Uruk-via Mongers, heavy goblin halberds, so we will be seeing them here. So the phalanx could be useful in a defensive sense, as well as White Uruk-via Mongers, as we've said before. Heavy goblin infantry, obviously goblin archers. Pretty standard fare for the goblins here. A lot of numbers, but they're going to have to go up against some really high quality units from Unbar here. We'll see how that goes. Some cave troll drummers. This is King Amahi, who is going to be playing as the third Misty Mountains army. Some cave trolls up here as well. More heavy goblin spears, Goblin King bodyguard, which is his general. I think King Amahi was actually the other player to send this one to me, so thank you to him as well. Goblin spears, heavy goblin spears. He's got a catapult as well, which in this position, again, I think they're going to be fairly reliant on something like this, really sort of pulling its weight. And then he's got several units of heavy goblin halberdiers as well. Some heavy goblin infantry as we go down here. The ground textures up high on the mountain pass always look really ugly. And then we've got the heavy goblin infantry, heavy goblin crossmen of course, and then some more heavy goblin spears, and that's going to be pretty much it. Now you may notice that both of these two forces are fairly far away from one another, so there will be a cut, which is, this fight is likely to resolve itself fairly quickly, all things considered, because it's only just shy of 30k frames, and it's going to take a fair amount of time for both armies to march towards one another. We'll see if the goblins can weather this storm, but it's going to be a tall ask. I'll rejoin when the battle is beginning. So, indeed, this is an area of the map you can traverse. I wasn't just spouting nonsense the whole time on this map. I was saying you could go this way. And this is going to be essentially a little 1v1 that's going to be happening. The frame rate is struggling a little bit as all of these units are moving around the map. But essentially this is going to be a kind of a 1v1. That's actually Engsvitz's Númenórean Lancers that are over here as well. So Engsvitz is going to be offering some support to his ally. That is a shower of arrows and crossbow bolts flying into these Númenórean Lancers. They actually managed to withstand the initial volley. The Goblin Infantry is moving forward to block the charge on the archers. The heavy Goblin Spears have also caught them. I can't imagine the Númenórean Lancers are going to last too long in this situation. They're already wavering. In fact, I'm just going to turn the speed down so that the frame rate isn't quite so offensive. Yeah, they're already routing. I mean, Númenórean units as well. This is a unit which has got high morale, but he really did sort of throw them under the bus there. Like, charging them in, you saw the the shower of arrow fire and crossbow bolts, projectiles. There's also Snaga in there, so if they did get much further, there would have been javelins in there as well. So that was a bit of a fool's errand to go and do that. Meanwhile, there is a bit of an ambush going on over here. There's some heavy goblins down the bottom of the hill over here, or this might be units that King Amahi forgot to move. The heavy goblin infantry can hide, but the standard goblin infantry can hide, but the heavy goblins cannot. So this might have been units that he simply forgot to move. And this is exactly the sort of thing that the warlords of Unbar will enjoy the sight of, because they will simply be able to charge them into oblivion. And standard goblin units like this will not have the morale to hold themselves together for all that long. And this again, even sort of very basic units like this are units which the Misty Mountains can scarcely afford to throw away for nothing. They are in a difficult situation. They definitely have the high ground, which, high ground OP, but it's still going to be difficult for them. Really the terrain and the defender's advantage is really the only thing they have going for them in this situation. In terms of numbers and in terms of overall quality, I would say that Unbar have got the edge here. And these heavy goblins obviously are going to waver off and break pretty fucking quickly. Meanwhile, this is honestly going to be pretty tricky as far as going through this little gap goes for Starling, although One problem that Vaughn Mountain may very well run into is the fact that these armies up here, who are slowly but surely making their way through these areas, could sneak up behind him and go this way, which will of course... Actually, can they? I don't know if they can, actually. I don't know if there is a road down there. I could have sworn there was on this map, but I don't believe there is. Which would mean, I think they would have to... Yeah, the only way to get to Vaughn Mountain in this situation is to go through this little choke point here. Which, that's going to be fairly brutal for Unbar. But you would have to suggest that really the thing that's going to make that most difficult is going to be the ballista. He has also invested fairly heavily in his skirmish line, which does mean that his ability to hold the line with all of his infantry is going to be limited to an extent. We'll see though. I mean, it's going to be... You know, Starling is not going to have the most favourable KD in this match, you would suspect. But you know, sometimes you have to be the sacrificial lamb for your team. Meanwhile, the frames continue to... the frames will get better as these units die off, I'm sure. Those Goblin Infantry actually lasted longer than the heavy goblins in melee, but ultimately these units have been utterly vanquished. You can see going up that pathway there, Eclipse 2500 and the main body of Enxvitz's army marching forth. So there are of course two ways up. There's this little pathway up there, and then there's going right the long way around up to the peak. But yeah, this is going to be tricky. So there's going to be two armies essentially going up each pathway. King Amahi and Valda are essentially going to have to kill two armies with their one army, or hope that they can damage them enough to the point where Vaughn Mountain is then the last man standing. And again, this is not the easiest defence to crack. We've seen, you know, I don't know which version, well, which Mountain Pass battle I'm going to do first, but I think it's going to be this one. But last Mountain Pass battle that I posted up showed Mirkwood in a last stand up here, and the Athalion Nanwaith were able to pull out a pretty grim-looking situation for Mirkwood, but obviously the elves have got a level of quality available to them that the Misty Mountains don't, it's fair to say. Meanwhile, here we go. The ballista is now firing as Starling is starting to charge through here. And the ballista is going to have to do better than that. It needs to land its hits really badly as they come through this choke point. Starting to land a few hits now, but obviously then the archer line is going to open up. I'm not sure whether this wall of spears is going to be sufficient to hold off Starling's entire army. These black Uruks, which are reinforcements as well, the heavy goblin crossbows are there, but I'm just not sure that Vaughn Mountain has enough infantry, and this ballista is really letting him down pretty hardcore at the moment, burying most of its shots into this very, very slight hill. Obviously the Abrazanim are coming forward as well, and the Abrazanim are a good unit. There are a lot of heavy goblin spears to crush their way through, but the AP will certainly help them. The goblin archers still just biding their time. There's some blackback berserkers on the hill over there. It will be interesting to see who wins this one as the fight begins in earnest. I think we will actually just turn it down to half speed once again, because I think we're going to be seeing action on all fronts here as the initial engagements start to happen. We've got some Castamir's Legion as well, so obviously Abrazanim, Nadu Tariq and Castamir's Legion together, that's tough. I mean, the heavy goblin spears are good for what they are, but I mean, with all of Unbar's good units that they've got coming in here, they're obviously going to be backing them up with Corsair Pikes as well, so that's going to be a Phalanx that's following them in. It's going to be tricky, I think, for Vaughn Mountain. I think obviously his ranged power is going to be the thing which sees him through, if anything. Meanwhile, getting up here to the part of the map with the hideous ground textures, we have Valda, who is about to be engaged by the first units from Eclipse 2500, the Pikes moving into position. He's got a combination of heavy goblin infantry and heavy goblin halberd. As far as the frontline phalanx goes, it's not quite on the same level as Isengard's front line of Uruk-hai infantry and pikemen. But in this situation, you know, needs must. The Corsair pikemen are also going to come under fire, which is a good choice, honestly. Goblin archers are not really the most damaging of archers, but obviously Corsair pikemen are really, really horrendous under arrow fire. You can see here that Beleaguered halberds also following them. That is a big force that these goblins are going to have to try and hold back. There are the cave trolls over there as well. But still, slowly and surely. These arrows can scarcely miss though, even as inaccurate as goblins are. They have plenty of surface area to hit in this situation. Meanwhile, over here it's pretty chaotic scrambling advance here for Starling, but that's just fine from his point of view. The ballista projectiles flying overhead. Again, I can only apologise about the frame rate, but this is something that I've said before. There's nothing I can do about it, really. I'm already turning the graphics down a fair amount. I've had to stop using reshade, etc. These Nadu Tariq, the numbers are proving to be the problem here, though. They do need a little bit of support. Fortunately, there are the Corsair Blackguards just in behind them, the Corsair Pikemen also heading forwards. Even the Castamir's Legion are initially struggling against these heavy Goblin Spears, who are starting to wrap around them. But as soon as the second wave of Starling's army comes forward, you would expect Von Mountain's army to start struggling a little bit more. But he does also have the reinforcements. The Black Uruks could come in at any moment and try and shore the line up. Goblin Infantry also coming forward. Again, that Goblin Infantry is sort of very much like putting a plaster on a limb that's been blown off. If your line is starting to fall apart, because they won't be able to patch it up for long. But still, at this point, it's all hands to the grindstone. Starling's still moving forwards with more men pouring through the choke point. Again, I don't think the ballista was, those initial shots in the ballista could have been far better, which would have certainly helped matters when the vast bulk of Starling's frontline infantry was pouring through the gap. Abrazani, Nadu Tariq trying to sort of mulch their way through the heavy Goblin Spears, but it's the numbers of the heavy Goblin Spears which are really holding them in good stead here. And this is part of the reason why they're so good. Obviously, individually, over time, they will start to crumble under the weight of stronger infantry like the ones they're facing. But as it stands, the AP, sheer numbers of them, it's difficult for Unbar's front line here to really efficiently cut their way through. And all the while this is happening, of course, the Goblin firing line is doing its bit, as is the ballista. And now I think you can see the Castamir's Legion trying to sort of sneak their way through to try and get at the ballista, but unfortunately for Exfits, the White Uruk Mongers are going to be on station to immediately shut this down. The Castamir's Legion also pushing through the gaps. Again, this is a very sound move, but unfortunately for them as well, this is just going to encourage Von Mountain to commit his Black Uruks forward, who are not having a great time under arrow fire, it must be said. So it really is tit for tat so far as the skirmish forces go, but not the easiest engagement for Unbar so far. The Misty Mountains will probably be pretty pleased with their day's work thus far. Meanwhile, up here I think is going to be the main issue for the Misty Mountains, where it is essentially, they're outnumbered 2 armies to 1 on both fronts. The Corsair Pikemen are routing, which is surprising. The Cave Trolls sort of charging towards the front line, probably they decided they wanted none of that. So the Misty Mountains phalanx up here holding firm for the time being. And the Cave Trolls will be able to push through and get at the Crossbow Corsairs, which is probably what Valda is thinking here. He wants to get in there and shut down the Crossbow Corsairs, although honestly, I'm not sure that's really necessary. Using your Goblin Archers to skirmish cost effectively with the Crossbow Corsairs is probably the way to go. Save your Trolls for a little bit later, perhaps, when the Javelins become more of a problem. Because if you don't have any answer to the Corsair Blackguards in the late game and you have to just sort of sit there and take it, that's the sort of thing which can leave you in a pretty horrendous state. But as it is, obviously the Cave Trolls, extremely effective line breakers just mulching their way through. And the Corsair Savages are obviously going to be taking damage from those tree trunks and mighty stone hammers as this is happening. The Castamir's Legion, however, are there to shut the Cave Trolls' push down. And unfortunately, the Cave Trolls in sustained combat, not the finest. So I think you can see Valda has sort of seen the error of his ways and he's going to try and get them out of there. But even so, maybe a little bit of a misplay there, which could act against them in the late game. Meanwhile, down here in the lower portion of the map, there is still some routing goblins after Cannon Fodder's knights had the good fortune of, simply...
Lord preserve us, we have lost half of our men.
Half of our men? We're seeing this from Sin's perspective though, aren't we? He hasn't lost jack shit. How strange. Well, perhaps he means Starling, the announcer, which would certainly make a lot more sense, because Starling has had a little bit more of a tougher time of it. His Crossbow Corsairs and his Blackguards are now in position, but you can see here just the sheer volume of arrows flowing into the army, and also, over here definitely the MVPs have been the Heavy Goblin Spears, holding up very well to the initial engagements. All they needed to do really was hold the line, and the AP damage has also certainly helped things. Here in the middle, they're struggling a little bit more. Several units of Castamir's Legion made life a little bit more difficult, but obviously with the oncoming reinforcements of the Black Uruks and also the White Uruk Fearmongers in particular, the White Uruk Fearmongers have got some really nasty damage that they can do with that AP. You would imagine that things are actually relatively under control. The Blackback Berserkers also yet to be committed, I think. They've just sort of moved out of range of the range fire. Also the Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen. It's very difficult to sort of gauge how well the ranged units are doing over the course of a live replay like this. But you can only imagine with the crossbows in that kind of position, they are pretty much ideally placed, and they've mown their way through these units of Corsairs. Engsfit sending up a couple more units of pikes and Beleaguered footmen, but honestly I think over here the Misty Mountains are going to be victorious. Now, as soon as Von Mountain has sort of run out of ammunition for all of his units, his army does become significantly less scary, because obviously a lot of his army was made up of ranged firepower. But even so, if the Misty Mountains do win this, that is just another feather to their cap. And there's no guarantee of that, of course. As soon as they start running out of ammunition, it could be the Unbar's melee expertise really starts to come into it. 2 units of Black Uruks, after all, is not going to be able to equalise against all of these Harbingers and Castamir's Legion. There's also the Naru and Aru Sentinels in here as well, one of the finest pike units in the game, which, they've got crossbows to deal with them, so we'll see. There's their pikemen also on rushing. Again, a very chaotic fight this is. These Heavy Goblin Spears starting to get shaken as well, and that could be an issue here. I'm actually surprised the drummers are not... Well, the drummers are probably in range, actually, so probably a good thing they are. There's a bit of friendly fire there, which the Misty Mountains can really scarcely afford. But they are also carving their way into the Unbar reinforcements as they come in as well. More pikes at that. Naru and Aru Royal Guard. Only 22 of them left. Here you can see the Goblin Infantry. Again, the Castamir's Legion finding a gap. And it's going to be up to the Goblin Infantry to try and patch it up this time, which, needless to say, the Castamir's Legion will have no issues facing the Goblin Infantry whatsoever. Meanwhile, over here, still a singular choke point fight, which the Misty Mountains will be fine with, I think. Being attacked from 2 sides, I think, would have been their primary worry. Especially considering, all of the javelins and the crossbows that Unbar can bring. But only having to deal with that from one direction so far is not going to be too awful for them. The Snaga are also in a pretty good position, raining their javelins down on the oncoming Unbar infantry, which they will need to do, because obviously these Castamir's Legion are tough cookies. Although on the front line as well, you can also see these Heavy Goblin Halberds and Spears, so a lot of AP damage in general that Unbar are having to deal with here. The Castamir's Legion is strong, but AP is the way to go. And here's another rout here from the Corsair Savages. Been in melee a little too long for their liking. Taken a lot of damage, under javelin fire, lost their stomach for the fight. They are going to run, but just look at all the reinforcements that are ready to come in. There's also more coming up from the lower portion of the map. Cannon Fodder's army making his way up here. Maybe they're just sort of biding their time. The Castamir's Rangers are in here as well, which it's clear to say that the Castamir's Rangers will... Nice hits there from the catapult. This could be where the catapult really earns its keep. But the Castamir's Rangers are obviously going to be the target of pretty much every Goblin Archer that's up here now, seeing as they're coming into range, because body piercing is something which, the Misty Mountains are absolutely going to want to shut down as quickly as they possibly can. Probably even more so than the Crossbow Corsairs, to be honest with you, because when you're in densely packed formations like the Misty Mountains are, that can be really nasty. Beleaguered Archers doing their best to also fire it. Again, attrition-wise, Unbar have just got so many men that they can bring forward. You would imagine eventually the Misty Mountains will probably start to be in a pretty rough spot. Like over here, you can see the Beleaguered footmen pushing their way through, and they are absolutely doing the right thing in trying to shut down these Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen, because they have surely been doing a lot of damage to Unbar as this fight has been going on, and they are defenceless over here. I think it would have been interesting to see, instead of the Blackback Berserkers, it might have been worth, time. Because obviously with RP you have to sort of choose what units you're going to recruit and etc. Might have actually been worth on Mountain's time to have a unit of Bolg's Champions instead. Wherever the line was breaking, quickly charge in and do a huge amount of damage. But now you can also see that Cannon Fodder's Warlords are on the way over here, and there are now a lot of gaps which he is going to be able to take advantage of. You can see over here that the Black Uruks doing their best to hold this line together, as well as the Heavy Goblin Spears, who are only just alive. There's those heavy goblin crossbows as well. I mean, at this point, Von Mountain absolutely needs to deal with these warlords, because they're the sort of thing which could run roughshod all over the back line of his army. And he only really had one infantry line. As soon as that's gone, his army's doomed, you would imagine. These goblin archers are going to get in the way of the crossbows at the very least. The Snaga are also here. Point blank javelin fire into the warlords. We'll see if they fare any better than the Numenorean Lancers, who really did last samurai their way into Von's army. A second unit of Snaga skirmishers as well. Really eager to shut down the heavy goblin crossbowmen, which, again, completely understandable. They've almost certainly done huge amounts of damage thus far. The problem is, however, there are so many targets for them to go after. They're going to go after the ballista here, but the real dangers to the warlords themselves, at this point, would appear to be the Snaga skirmishers, unopposed, throwing their javelins into the warlords. It's going to be close. You can actually see on the front line as well the Blackback Berserkers have been committed, although they are up against Naru and Aru Sentinels. That's probably not ideal for them. Going up to 1 speed again. My frames. Again, the warlords, again going after the Snag. You can see the cave trolls here, Von Mountain here. It's panic stations at this point, trying to deal with the warlords, although he might be able to in this situation, because the warlords are not really in an ideal position to engage.
Are badly blooded. They have lost half their men.
The Snaga trying to throw into this blob over here, presumably. It's... Again, I would imagine that's Von Mountain's army, which has lost half his men. It's very likely to be a Pyrrhic victory for either side on this engagement, but Unbar will certainly take that over the Misty Mountains, who needed a victory over here, really. The ballista is now also being engaged. The warlords are shaken, and again, this is the problem. So many targets for them to go after, so many javelins, trolls, just all sorts of goblins getting in their way, making it very difficult to form a unified charge. The heavy goblin archers are over here, although Von Mountain will probably be absolutely okay with a unit of heavy goblin archers that are out of ammunition being the target of the warlord's wrath. And they're also turning their back to a huge amount of javelin fire. Very inaccurate, sort of 4 javelins, low damage fire, but even so, the Snaga can certainly count themselves to be doing their job pretty well here, although they will certainly not enjoy being charged like that. The goblin archers trying their best. Meanwhile, over here is a bit of a problem. You can see that Unbar... There are some goblin archers over here that tried to come to the aid of the heavy goblin crossbowmen, but this part of the battlefield, you would have to say, is probably lost at this point. It's going to be elsewhere that Von Mountain is going to have to do the business. The warlords charging into the backs there of some heavy goblin spears, which is bold. I mean, as soon as the heavy goblin spears start landing blows on the warlords, that's AP spears. Here come the Blackback Berserkers as well, and it's just, oof, this is going to be nasty. In a sustained fight, the Blackback Berserkers are going to be able to do huge amounts of damage, and the warlords at this point very, very damaged. So too is Unbar. I mean, the Misty Mountains have still got so many skirmishers that are out of ammunition. You would imagine actually the Misty Mountains are going to win over here.
Lord protect us. Our general lies slain upon the battlefield.
Well, there goes Starling's general. So the announcer is sort of saying this as if he's from Starling's perspective, which is a strange one. Heavy goblin crossbows. Again, taking damage. They're still alive, however, and that is the end. So they still have a unit of depleted crossbows that are going to be able to help out. I think the White Uruks are still in pretty decent health as well. Well, 32. That's not great. They're also receiving backup, and that's going to be a break over here. So it looks as though Von Mountain is going to be victorious, although another assault like that, if Unbar are victorious on the other side of the battlefield, he's not going to be able to do that again, you would imagine. And there is still units that he needs to clear up. I mean, the Naru and Aru Sentinels could still fight Unbar out of this hole. And over here there's still this sort of mass of Beleaguered units, although with the Blackback Berserkers over here, the Beleaguered units are unlikely to enjoy life all that much. They could save the heavy goblin crossbowmen here, the Misty Mountains of Von Mountain. Let's go and see what's happening on the other side meanwhile. There's not been a huge amount of... Well, there has been a bit of movement, but as expected really, this is just a cluster of Unbar and Misty Mountains forces, although you would imagine this is probably going to favour Unbar. This sort of chaos with their numbers and their quality, all of these heavy goblins sort of throwing themselves in the way. The catapult really needs to get some good hits, like right in here where all of these Castamir's Legion, the Beleaguered halberds are at. These fire arrows are not going to help matters for the Misty Mountains as they try and hold the line up here. We're actually approaching the halfway point of this battle as well. What on earth happened here? I would imagine that looks like the work of Rangers. There's a lot of fire arrows coming in, so will the catapult get a good hit? It will. Bit of friendly fire there as well, but decent hits there. They're going to need far more of that if they're going to be victorious, because there's still cannon fodder and Sin's armies to worry about. Well, what is going on over here? You can see now that cannon fodder is starting to advance up this side as well. Again, it's unsurprising just to sort of probe them from both directions, although that sounded nasty. This catapult has got sort of like the perfect position here. So both Eclipse and Eclipse, who are the first ones in, are going to be taking a lot of damage. The Javelins also raining down on the advance. But I don't think it's going to be enough. Unbar slowly but surely are just sort of pushing their way through, and they're going to need more reinforcements over here. More heavy Goblin Infantry is on its way, but how long are they really going to be able to hold out for here? We shall see. That will be our primary focus in just a moment, because over here, the Misty Mountains are going to be victorious, you would fancy. In fact, I think they have been victorious, completely and utterly.
Our men are fleeing. Our men have fought long and are becoming tired.
Well, there you go. Starling has been defeated. Even the additional reinforcements from Eclipse were not enough to have him prevail over here. He did have to go into a really hideous engagement, to be fair. Von Mount certainly had the defensive positional wrapped up, but it still could have gone to Starling. You know, there was only one infantry line. Like, they were trying to push their way through, but ultimately the position, the formation, all of those ranged units, it was always going to be fairly difficult. Crossbows in an ideal position as well. Heavy Goblin Spears just so cost effective on the front line as well, backed up by Black Uruks. It was always going to be tough. And this is going to allow Von Mountain to potentially move forward and try, at the very least, to come to the aid of his beleaguered allies. I'm not sure whether all of this is going to be sufficient, but we'll see. So, heading back over here, we can see the Misty Mountains front line at this point is starting to look pretty ropey, it's fair to say. The Corsair Blackguards have forced their way through. All of that front line is broken at this point, so it's time to form another front line. Valda is sending forward some White Uruk Fearmongers to that end. We are more or less actually through to the halfway point now, and we can see the Unbar have lost less than the Misty Mountains, and that's primarily because of this engagement up here. I just don't see how the Misty Mountains are going to be able to slow down Unbar enough to the point where they can pin them in place and allow the crossbows and catapult to do its job. If they lose this catapult here as well, I would say that's probably game over. Here come the Snow Trolls, which, considering the oncoming Naru Sentinels, is unsurprising. Trolls can do a lot of damage to pikes, and the Naru Sentinels are not multiple HP. It's time to shift the catapult back a little bit, I think. Valda needs to get his catapult in over here, although, to be fair, they do have two. But even so, the catapults are such an important part of this defence up here. The White Uruks are in place, trying to deal with those Corsair Blackguards. The Snaga are still here, throwing their javelins. All of these fire arrows coming in there. When it comes to just a battle of attrition at range, Unbar are one of the strongest. Stuff like the Beleaguered archers, that is their bread and butter. These Snow Trolls over here, though, trying to mulch their way through the Castamir's Legion. There's Harbingers of Castamir in there as well. Snow Trolls trying to get in there, perhaps to the Blackguards to stop them from firing, which again, you know, the Blackguards obviously going to be able to do a lot of damage, more than the Snaga are going to be able to manage, although the Snaga they've been pretty decent this match. The Beleaguered, however, starting to rout. Here you can see the Castamir's Legion just pushing their way through, trying to get to those Snaga to shut them down. It really is just utter chaos here. There is a front line, but both factions are sort of pushing through it to get to the javelins in behind that are supporting them, as I nearly fall off the cliff. Some Castamir's Rangers over there as well, which have taken pretty substantial losses and are continuing to be the target of some skirmisher somewhere. But with the White Uruk Fearmongers over here, there's also Crossbow Corsairs that are basically point blank. Utter madness. It really is just a massacre for both sides over here at this point. There's arrows, fire arrows, javelins, crossbow bolts. Just a complete mosh pit of a melee fight as well. The catapult is right in the middle there. I think he's probably tried to move his catapult crew away. More Misty Mountains forces coming down. Let's see what's happening down over here. Cannon fodder actually not going this way anymore. Reorganising, so they're not going to probe from this way? That surprises me.
Our noble brothers have lost their leader.
Well, there goes another Unbar general. Keeping some units back here just in case, but you would have to say that this fight over here is going to prove to be pretty decisive, you would imagine. Unbar are probably far happier about this than the Misty Mountains, to be fair. Like, the Misty Mountains really are just trying to sort of stop the momentum, but when you've got this much manpower at your disposal, it's always going to be difficult. The Snow Trolls are doing their best to put a dent in all of these units of Castamir's Legion, but you can see Unbar putting all their skirmishers over here, able to fire right into the glut of goblins which make up the Misty Mountains defence. The heavy goblin spears doing their best, but you know, the quality of Unbar's infantry here, you would imagine, is going to be what sees them through. There are blackbacks in there though. Blackbacks and white uruks are a pretty nasty combination, but one problem is the white uruks are hideously out of formation. Unbar just continuing to move forward. They've still got reinforcements on the horizon as well. Again, I don't want to get too close just in case it routs. And Vaughn Mountain is so far away as well that by the time he arrives, I imagine the goblins are going to be long dead. The horn blares once again. At this point, I would say the Misty Mountains have committed so many resources out here, they probably need to keep doing so. If they don't, then it's game over, man. Here comes a unit of Goblin King Bodyguard. They'll be inspiring the nearby goblins to stay in the fight for a little longer. They themselves are tough cookies to take down as well, but here comes some Corsair Blackguard charging in to the side of these goblins. And yeah, the Blackbacks are getting overwhelmed here. You can see just the sheer numbers of Unbar just being used. And it's numbers and quality as well, which is one of the reasons why the Misty Mountains was always going to struggle quite a lot. There's just a nice amount of javelins there that connected with a unit of heavy goblin halberds. Once again, what does Vaughn Mountain do? Because I think his allies are going to be dead by the time he arrives. More to the point, I don't think they're going to have killed enough, so I believe the prediction about Unbar pulling this one through is probably going to be fairly accurate. What on earth was that? Is he trying to shoot the moon? That one still hasn't come back down. That landed... Did that land? There it is. What the... Come on, please. Why would you do this? Well, Sin's catapult has arrived on the scene, I see. And while King Amar's catapult is trying to be a mortar, Sin's catapult is working as intended, sniping out one of the Misty Mountains generals over here, which, you know, it being goblins, they're probably not going to last too long under this kind of scrutiny, as we are now within the final 10,000 frames.
The enemy are badly blooded. They have lost half their men.
Still some blackbacks in behind enemy lines, as well as a lone troll trying to do what they can. But it's unlikely to have too much of an effect on that catapult. Sin's catapult arguably being more effective even than the Misty Mountains catapult was just a moment ago, and there's a rout from the goblins, unsurprising after the loss of their general, and continued range fire from a catapult as well. That was a really impressive shot. This catapult, which is shooting its projectiles about 5 miles into the air, still managed to hit one of Sin's catapults. Impressive. Meanwhile, the continued push goes on. Engsvitz, cannon fodder, Eclipse and Sin going to be continuing to move forwards, and at this point the goblins that were up here on the peak of the hills are not really going to have too much in the way of resistance for them. There's the catapult crew, although they're never going to be able to remount their catapult again, you would imagine. Some heavy goblin spears, there's another unit of Goblin King Bodyguard, some Snaga. The damage they're going to be able to do at this point is probably going to be extremely limited. We'll see if that catapult can make something happen for them, but outside of that, I can't really see any hope for the goblins. Indeed, I can't really see any hope for them now, because some of the Unbar units, some of the Abrazani have managed to push their way through immediately and get to the catapult crew. Although, to be fair, the catapult's still firing, so they're doing their thing. Snarg are trying their best, but a lot of their javelins are actually being blocked by their own catapult. Still Unbar just using their momentum, crushing their way through. So I would imagine the last portion of this battle is going to be taken up by Unbar hunting down what's left of Von Mountain's army. Again, in the context of an RP though, I'm not sure how this affected things after, but even if Unbar win, obviously the losses are maintained. It could be that this battle was far more important for Unbar than it was for the Misty Mountains. But then again, maybe not. This might be a disaster for the Misty Mountains. Point blank crossbow bolts finding their mark, but obviously heavy goblin crossbows, very useful tool for the Misty Mountains at range, as we saw on the other side of the map where Von Mountain managed to pull out a victory. Not the finest of melee though, as with most crossbows, to be fair. Unbar continuing to move forwards, still got plenty left in reserve as well, so this is going to be a bit of a landslide. But, you know, as far as an RP battle goes, it also showed there was a lot of reasons to show this one though. Particularly the battle between Von Mountain and Starling on the other side. They managed to win over there, the Misty Mountains, technically, but overall just the sheer strength of Unbar was the primary problem here. The Misty Mountains were always going to struggle. They would need a significant quality advantage over the Unbar armies, as well as being able to use these defensive positions, and ultimately I would say that Unbar had the quality advantage. Lots of Castamir's Legion and Abrazani to make up the core of their army. Even the Beleaguered are pretty decent. Meanwhile, the Misty Mountains had to make do with a lot of heavy goblins, which, when you have the numbers advantage as the Misty Mountains, is fine, but when you don't, it's a problem. You're asking them to try and use quality, which goblins don't know the meaning of the word. Well, what's going on over here? We have a lone pikeman. There's Von Mountain's army, which is looking pretty battered. Hang on a minute, where did these guys come from? Were they hidden in these trees? Is that what's happening here? Well, there are a few units over here at the very least, but I don't think they're going to be able to get away. They might be trying to retreat, actually, down from the hill. But unfortunately there is no escape. Cannon fodder has blocked the only way out. So they may as well try and finish off what they can over here. They're going to be able to kill off a unit of Castamir's Rangers. High value target. Meanwhile, up here, pikes. Here with the heavy goblin crossbows, it's all Snarger and heavy goblin ranged units, which, needless to say, morale-wise, probably not going to be sticking around too long in the fight. Of course, our blackguards for Unbar have proven themselves to be pretty effective in this fight thus far. Those javelins doing a nice amount of damage to the Misty Mountains' defensive positions. So have the Snarger though. The Snarger have proven themselves very worthwhile. Unbar now charging down the hill, presumably to try and kill off the force that was either lying in ambush or trying to escape, one of the two. Either way, it's not going to go too well for them, you would imagine. Especially seeing as these crossbows over here under ranged fire from something. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, up there. The Beleaguered archers taking up a position on the cliff. Going after the crossbow man. The danger unit here down here, but we've got heavy goblin spears as well. Slowly but surely poking and prodding their way through the Castamir's Rangers, but as soon as the reinforcements from Unbar arrive down here, it's going to go against them, you would imagine. Meanwhile, Sin is sending across his army, or at least a big portion of his army, to try and deal with Von Mountain's oncoming forces. And you would imagine he's not going to have too many issues with that. Sin obviously still has the freshest army, and presumably he still has all of his ammunition intact, because he almost certainly wouldn't have needed to use it, which is going to be a problem for Von Mountain, who has almost certainly utilised almost all of his ammunition, if not all of it. So Corsair archers getting into position, showering arrows down on the Misty Mountains as they try and approach. There's very little Von Mountain can do in this situation. He got the initial victory, so he can hold his head high in that regard, but those Goblin archers. Meanwhile, Corsair archers taking some damage from some of the Goblins up here on the hill. This is going to be the final holdout of the Goblins over here, though, and unfortunately Unbar reinforcements are on the way. The Crossbows are there.
They have lost half their men.
The heavy Goblin Spears are probably not going to like going up against the Abrazani Narduzagar either. Nice and skillful Swordmaster unit. And they're already very tired. Some Crossbows over here. Still taking damage, but are the Abrazani just going to go straight for the Crossbows, try and finish them off? I think they are. The danger unit for the Misty Mountains here. They're going to get a point-blank volley into the Abrazani. Actually, they're going for the Casimir's Rangers, unfortunately for them, which naturally is going to mean it wasn't really much of a charge, it was more of an amble into melee from the Abrazani, but you know, maybe they're just sort of basking in their glory, just walking into melee pridefully. Obviously Crossbow is going to be no match for them in melee, and then they're going to be able to recharge this cluster of heavy Goblin Spears as well. The Goblin King bodyguard trying to retreat. I'm surprised actually that Cannon Fodder has not pushed up here. Well, regardless. Heavy Goblin Spearmen being chased down the hill by Balagaya footmen from Sin's army. Obviously Sin perching himself on these hills. At this point it's really just clean-up duty. Trying to deal with Von Mountain's army. Vaughn trying to use his ballista to snipe out some more of Sin's forces. These cave troll drummers as well. I don't know if those Crossbows have still got ammunition, possibly, but I don't think it really matters at this point. Corsair archers are in position. Sin had some crossbow Corsairs of his own anyway, so a unit of battered crossbows is certainly not going to be enough to turn the tide here. Balagaya footmen continuing to just push forwards. They're actually shaken. I mean, they are in and amongst armour-piercing units, and they're all on their own as they've overextended a little bit here. Regardless. Back over here, and unsurprisingly more Unbar reinforcements have arrived. Balagaya halberds. The Abrazani are here as well. Balagaya archers that are out of ammunition at this point just being thrown in to try and deal with what's left of the spears. There is also the Goblin King bodyguard on the front line now, but even a unit of multiple HP infantry like themselves is not going to be enough to turn this small fight around, let alone the whole battle. Azog is in there. More units coming down the hill as well. And now Unbar are also going up this direction as well, sandwiching them in. Balagaya halberds advancing. Going to engage the heavy Goblin crossbows in melee. Balagaya archers are actually shaken, but the heavy Goblin crossbows they're fighting are wavering. So there you go. Oh, tree. Let's see here. Abrazani just sort of getting caught in a few of the Goblin King bodyguard. I suppose they are technically heavy Goblin Infantry with a nicer set of armour. Balagaya halberds coming in. Still the heavy Goblin Spears just sort of sat there holding the line. Certainly from a Misty Mountains perspective, I think the heavy Goblin Spears have shown themselves to be just a really efficient unit, particularly in the Von Mountain engagement, but also over here, just in this little fight here. They've shown themselves to be very, very strong. But ultimately Unbar's quality was just too great. In fact, they had the numbers advantage as well, was really just the final nail in the Misty Mountains coffin here. Misty Mountains tried to sort of hold the most defensible point they were able to on the map, but as it was, not enough in the end for them to win. See the cave trolls. Now Sin has swarmed forwards with Castamir's Legion. The Corsair archers also just raining death down upon the ballista. Still some white Uruks left alive. There's also some units coming this way. Naru Na'aru Royal Guard getting into melee with the cave trolls. And they're multiple HP, so they won't mind going up against sort of trolls that are not designed for melee combat.
Enemy flees the battle. Run down those worthless peasants.
Yep, there goes King Amar's army, as well as Valda, so that's going to be the end of him. Victorious here within the pass itself. At the entrance to the pass, however, is where Vaughn Melton is going to make his final stand, and it's going to be Sin, combined with a few units from his allies' armies as well. Engsfitz, it would appear, just sort of coming forward and finishing him off. Some Snaga fighting bravely on the front line against Castamir's Legion. I think that's another unit which has done quite well for the Misty Mountains, actually. The Snaga, they've done their best, but again, the task that was given to them was simply too great in this situation. Obviously getting absolutely mulched now in melee by Castamir's Legion. There's still some Blackback Berserkers on the front line as well. Heavy Goblin Archers, obviously at this point it's desperate measures, routing Goblin Infantry. Still the White Uruk Fearmonger still alive, getting a kill there as well. Obviously their AP is very nasty. Castamir's Legion, obviously a very strong infantry unit in their own right as well. The Crossbow Corsairs getting into position. No rest for the weary from a Misty Mountains perspective here. Going after the Heavy Goblin Crossbowman. Castamir's Rangers also, so body piercing as well. Going right along this line of Snaga. There's Javelins. Just about everything now. Just throwing the kitchen sink at Vaughn Melton, seeing as he is the last Misty Mountains army left standing. And it was always going to be a tough battle for the Misty Mountains, I think, but even so, just a sort of around a 30% differential. Those javelins all just pouring in, and there goes the Vaughn Mountains javelin.
The enemy flees the battle.
It's going to be it for them.
Those worthless peasants.
So how come there's still just over 1,000 frames left then? Is there still a unit left alive over here? Oh, I can hear battle. This must be it. They're fighting something. Well, they were fighting something. They're now celebrating. So it must be something over here, surely. Or is that it? Ah, no, hang on. There is still a Vaughn Mountain unit left alive, and it is, of course, the Blackback Berserkers. So we may as well go into ×2 speed for their final stand. Surrounded on all sides by Naru Na'aru Sentinels, Castamir's Legion, Corsairs, Harbingers of Castamir, Blackguard.
We are blessed. The enemy general is dead.
Oh, that might have been Vaughn Mountain's general, actually.
To hell.
Interesting. So well played to Unbar. Obviously they are victorious in this RP battle, and they were the attackers as well. So they will have taken a little something for their troubles. Commiserations to the Misty Mountains as well. They really, it was always going to be tough for them, as I've said several times already. There's only so much you can do. They fought valiantly. They managed to get a victory on one section of the battle as well. They managed to kill off one of the Unbar armies. So that's a bit of a consolation at the very least. But again, as far as an RP battle goes, obviously you get less freedom with regards to what you can pick. Because you have to pick your armies in advance. And regardless of compositions, a 5v3 is always going to be pretty difficult. You can see there Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud getting 3,203 kills. A lot of that has to do with the fact that he was really the first one in to that engagement on top of the hill, and he did a lot of damage there, obviously. The Misty Mountains getting a decent amount of kills between them. Obviously King Amar, by the time a lot of his units were engaged, Unbar's momentum was already too much to stop. Vaughn Mountain getting a victory, ultimately not enough to give the Misty Mountains as a whole the victory, but even so, it's something that the Misty Mountains can take away from this. So let's see what all of the Unbar armies, what did the damage for them. So the Castamir's Legion doing well for Starling, as well as the Naru Na'aru Sentinels. Obviously Starling technically lost his battle, but his infantry was obviously still of good quality. It was really Vaughn Mountain's ranged units which were his bane. Engsfits, again, Beleaguered archers. I feel as though, again, units like that were always going to be a bit of a problem for the Misty Mountains to deal with. As soon as Unbar gets set with their skirmishers, it's often very difficult to get rid of them. Beleaguered footmen doing decently well as well. Numenorian Lancers obviously got utterly crushed without a kill, so that was a little bit gung-ho of him. Eclipse obviously getting a lot. The Castmere's Rangers just shy of 1,000 kills, 971, so obviously that goes to show how dangerous the Rangers can be if they're not focused down. We actually saw very early on in the battle that they strayed a little bit too close to the Misty Mountains armies and immediately started getting shot, but he retreated them, and then obviously he brought them back later on to do the real damage. Obviously that was, whenever you get a unit that gets 900 kills, it's going to be very, very difficult for your opponent to do anything about it. Cannon fodder, the Warlord's getting a good amount of kills actually in the end. So despite cavalry being a little bit more tricky to use, as we saw initially with the Numenorian Lancers, the Warlords still got a decent amount of kills. Obviously those charges on the units which were left behind, and then tried to do their best against Von Mountain's army, did some damage, but ultimately wasn't enough to kill Von Mountain's army entirely. Rangers getting a decent amount of kills as well. Sin, he started off pretty far away, so he didn't really get a chance to get too many kills. But even then, a lot of his archers still got a decent amount. The catapult was still an important factor because it basically got into position and immediately routed basically what was the last bastion of the Misty Mountains defence on that hill. That was the last real bulk of infantry they had, and a few hits and they were routed. So yeah, well played to Unbar. Obviously, they get to take a territory in the RP. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I always enjoy the BFA battles because there's a certain charm when it's sort of several people playing the same faction against obviously another unified faction. It gives it less of a chaotic feel, a bit more organised, which is always nice. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.